Good evening and welcome to SMNI. This is Business and Politics and I'm your host, Dante Klinkang. Tonight's topic is about using science diplomacy to address climate change, which is the focus of our guest, Glenn Banaguas. He wears many hats, mainly as a scientist and diplomat, and occasionally is an op-ed contributor to the Manila Times. Based on his background, his work involves analysis of conundrums brought about by climate change or variability in extreme events using scientific models, mathematical simulations, and data analytics. Applies participatory methods to program development and recommends science-based policy solutions. We'll ask him to explain that later. He has received numerous awards and recognition for his work. He is the only Filipino recipient of the prestigious United Nations Sasakawa Laureate for disaster risk reduction. He was also conferred the Asia Leader Award for Sustainability and Leadership, and he was the recipient of the Outstanding Filipino Award for his work in environment and conservation and science diplomacy. We will ask Mr. Banaguas, how does science diplomacy help fend off the risks of climate change? Mr. Glenn Banaguas, nice to see you again. Do you mind if I call you Glenn? Because that's how I normally call you. Thank you and welcome to Business and Politics. Thank you for making time.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Well, climate change is a big topic. We say in our business that this is a running story. Maybe can you give us an update on where the problem is now? And then your field is science diplomacy. What is the role of science diplomacy in tackling that issue? So where are we now first?
All right, in terms of science diplomacy, by the way, in 2016, I created this particular program, the Science Diplomacy Program, for the ASEAN region.
Okay.
So it's part of my activity as an honoree and as an awardee of the U.S. State Department. So I told, in one of my activities, I told them I want to create a program that is very sustainable. And that's the reason why I created the Science Diplomacy Program for the ASEAN region. And what is the purpose of this? The ASEAN Science Diplomacy Program is actually to train our outstanding scientists and engineers of Southeast Asia on how science is going to be communicated and how science is going to be used, going to be utilized by our policymakers and decision makers. Because we have seen a lot of policies and laws, and it's much better if science will be integrated to these policies. And that's the reason why I created that program. Now, our scientists, I don't want them to be siloed. If you talk to the scientists or the engineers will tell you, oh, this is what we're going to do, these are our programs. So very technical in nature. Yeah. But if you're a science diplomat, we want our science to be known. We want our science to be useful to the different beneficiaries of the project, the different partners. We want them to embrace the importance of science, and that's the reason why there is what we call Science Diplomacy Program.
I was a bit surprised, and forgive me for saying this, that because I've known you as a Harvard Kennedy School alumnus. We know each other also because of the Philippine Council of Foreign Relations, right? So I know the diplomacy part. I didn't realize your background was really chemical engineering.
Yes.
Right. So how did you get involved in this? What is the main thing that we should be looking at right now in terms of climate change?
Climate change, yes. The Science Diplomacy Program, right, it can be used as a platform to address the impacts and risks of climate change. So in 2010, I created this program, the Climate Smart Philippines Science for Service program. And part of what we do is to educate the different stakeholders. So we have been traveling to different parts of the country, different parts of Southeast Asia, on how we're going to come up with the best projects and programs that will really address the needs of our people. And that's the purpose of Climate Smart Philippines. So we have been traveling to Luzon, the Visayas, and Mindanao. To be more specific, for example, in Climate Smart Mindanao, we have partnered with Mindanao Development Authority in 2016. We partnered with them. That was during the time of Secretary Alonto when he was still alive. And part of the partnership is to train and capacitate all stakeholders, the government agencies, the local government units,
even the indigenous community. You're saying, right?
Correct. The academe, the university and colleges, the civil society organizations, the non-government organizations, the church leaders, the youth, the women, the communities of farmers, fisher folks, indigenous people, and even the private sector. So what is the purpose of that? For example, in Davao, because Davao before has never experienced tropical cyclones. But
Yeah.
if you look at the changes right now,
Right.
they have been experiencing flooding, they
Right.
have been experiencing different types of climate hazards.
Right.
And that's the reason why we need to capacitate the entire region. And part of that initiative and advocacy is to partner with
Okay.
Mindanao Development Authority, because I told them you cannot just go to Mindanao and create programs there. So
Right.
you need to go to different
Right.
government agencies to help you to implement the program.
Right.
And that's the reason why we partner with Minda. So we started in 2016, and last year we had a renewal of partnership
Okay.
with Secretary Acosta, and it was what? It was really great. Because now we're not only concentrating on the climate change adaptation, adaptation meaning assessing the risk and how we're going to manage the risk and how it's going to be communicated to different stakeholders. Now we're also integrating the climate change mitigation, the net zero emissions, because this is about the Paris and Glasgow agreements.
Sure.
So that's what we're also going to do, because what Minda or the Climate Smart Mindanao is focusing on is they also want to reduce their GHG emissions. I mean, for the entire Mindanao.
Right.
Yes.
So I'll get into that in a minute, but I'm just quite interested that you're doing this at the local and grassroots level, because
Yes.
when we talk about climate change, of course, what I hear most often are global policy,
Yes.
right? Because it affects the entire world, and of course national policy.
Yes.
But so I want to go back to that later. But where are we where are we now with the problem of climate change? Because we're already seeing the
Yes.
extreme weather events. We're seeing in North America these uncontrolled fires. You have intense typhoons with increasing frequency now in our part of the world. Is it scientifically accurate to say that the problem is here, or are these simply just dismissible as weather events?
Yes, actually, yes. In 2013, if you recall, Super Typhoon Haiyan, or Yolanda,
Yes,
it's a
Yolanda.
240 kilometer per hour super typhoon, a category 5.
Yeah.
So many people died. I mean, more
Sure.
than thousands and thousands of people died. Then we found out, all right, because because if you're a researcher, if you're a scientist, you always want to make a difference. You want
Okay.
to do it in a more scientific way. And I told myself, I told my researchers, why don't we do it in our own way? So
Okay.
people are doing biophysical assessment, socioeconomic assessment. So why don't we do it in such a way that we may be able to connect with the people there.
Okay.
And now in our case, so we're not only focusing on the biophysical assessment. The biophysical is you want to know the
Okay.
changes. For instance, how before
To establish baselines.
establish
and,
baselines, yes. For example, when was the last time you experienced tropical cyclones? How often
I
did you
see,
experience
I
tropical
see.
cyclones or flooding? Now, how are you going to compare them now?
Right.
So the same thing with the socioeconomics. For
So
example,
there's science to it
And
rather
there's-
than just hype about.
yes, and there's also what? There's also qualitative aspect of research.
I see.
Because if you're if you're a science diplomat, like I mentioned, I'm going to connect now.
Right.
We're not only limiting ourselves to laboratory. We
Okay.
don't just want to use our models,
Right.
to determine what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah.
What happened in the past, what is happening
You actually
right
have
now.
programs on the ground.
Yes, yes. And what is going to happen in the future.
Yeah.
So what we do is we want to connect.
Okay.
We want to establish that connection with the different
Okay.
people on the ground.
Okay.
So we include the psychological impact assessment because we want
Okay.
to know the level of stress, the
I see.
depression of the people, and
I see.
the most important thing is the religiosity and spirituality.
Okay.
Now, the impacts of what is the role of religion? What is the role of spirituality, religiosity, to make these people resilient?
Okay.
So we started with that particular program, and that's part
Okay.
of the social aspect or the
I
qualitative
see.
aspect of research. So it's a whole. The approach is not just the quantitative aspect using the models,
Right.
but you also want to validate these models by the actual experiences of the people.
Now, are you doing this uniquely in the Philippines, or are you part of a global community that's sort of comparing notes and working together on the methodologies and actual practices? What's the case?
Yeah, we started with the Climate Smart Philippines, and then
Okay.
we replicated that in Southeast Asia. That's
I
why.
see.
So from Climate Smart Philippines, we have the Climate Smart and Disaster Resilient ASEAN. So
I see.
for the 10 ASEAN member states, simply because that the climate the climate hazards or the climate risk that is experienced with the Philippines totally different from the different climate hazards that are also being experienced by the other ASEAN member states.
Yeah, you know, so one thing that I sometimes regret about media is that sometimes we simplify things, right? Because of the need for a sound, but I'm going to do it, which I hate to do. But is it still avoidable? The dreaded impact of climate change. There are some reports that say it's already here, it's too late, and that we simply adjust to it, or is there still something that we can do to prevent it or prevent the worst of it from happening?
Well, it's really cool, right? My advice to that is it has to be done in a sectoral approach. For example, if you talk about food security, then there are climate change adaptation programs for that. So if you talk about energy, so what are the mitigating measures? So what are different adaptation solutions for that? So it's really very hard to do it. To approach it. For example, the food, energy, water, because my advice would always be, okay, you have to address the problem in a sectoral manner, per priority area. Now, when you mentioned how are we going to address the impacts. In the Philippines, we have the National Climate Change Action Plan, or the NCCAP, and it has 7 priority areas. The food security, sustainable energy, water sufficiency, number 4, human security, 5, the ecological and environmental stability. Number 6, the climate smart and disaster resilient infrastructures and even services. And number 7, the knowledge management and capacity building. So how are we going to localize that so that people will understand the significance of the work?
Sure.
That's what we do. We travel to different parts of the country and we train them and capacitate them and tell them and teach them how climate change is going to be addressed at the local level.
Yeah, I remember when Senator Legarda was campaigning. This was also an issue that was important to her, and she was connecting climate change with poverty, right? Because they're the most vulnerable. Is that how you would maybe help people understand it or appreciate or do something about it? Because it affects the most vulnerable in society, right?
Yes, when we started the program Climate Smart Philippines, we really started. Focus was the agricultural sector, simply because the highest poverty incidents, they're either farmers or fisher folks.
That's right.
So every year, farmers and fisher. That's the reason why a part of the advocacy. Okay, the rich, they know what they're gonna do if they are devastated, for instance, by extreme weather events. But the poorer becomes poorer every time there is a disaster. Our farmers, for instance, it will take some time before they can recover because, for instance, the crop yield was devastated or was ruined by tropical cycles or typhoons. So something like that. So that's what we do. When we started with Climate Smart Philippines, the real focus was for the farmers and the fisher folks. That's why if you look at some of our works, we're focusing on the agricultural sector, our farmers, fisher folks, most vulnerable sector, the most vulnerable sectors in the society.
Right. Very, very interesting. Glenn, we'll just have to take a quick break.
Sure.
You're watching Business and Politics. We'll be right back.